Donald Malarkey jumps from a burning C-47 into total darkness. He can't see the ground. He doesn't know where his buddies are. He only knows that thousands of German soldiers are waiting below. In less than 12 hours, he and 11 men will assault 4 German 105mm cannons, tearing apart the troops on Utah Beach. It's a job for an entire company, but there are only 12 paratroopers. Most of them are scattered, lost, or dead. Malarkey carries a 60mm mortar, a pistol, and the certainty that he won't see sunrise. If you want to know how a young volunteer firefighter from Oregon became one of the most decorated soldiers of the war, subscribe now and hit the bell. Donald George Malarkey was born on July 31, 1921, in Astoria, Oregon, a small logging and fishing town where the Columbia River mates the Pacific Ocean. His parents were Irish Catholic, working-class people who believed in faith, hard work, and service. Don grew up hauling gear on fishing boats, loading sacks at the Pillsbury flour mill, and fighting fires as a volunteer when thousands of acres of old-growth forest burned in the Tillamook Burn. He wasn't rich, he wasn't connected, but he knew how to work, and he knew how to finish what he started. In 1939, Malarkey graduated high school and enrolled at the University of Oregon. He wanted to study business, maybe become a teacher or work in the timber industry like his father. But on December 7, 1941, everything changed. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Malarkey was in his first semester when the news broke. Within days, he tried to enlist in the Marines. They turned him down, dental problems. He tried the Army Air Forces, rejected again, insufficient math scores. Most young men would have given up. Malarkey didn't. One afternoon in early 1942, he picked up a copy of Life magazine. Inside was a photo spread on a new type of soldier, paratroopers, men who jumped out of airplanes behind enemy lines, armed with knives, grenades, and guts. The article said the training was brutal. It said most men quit. It said only the toughest made it through. Malarkey read every word. Then he walked into a recruiting office and volunteered for the Airborne. He had good reasons to fight. 2 of his uncles served in the First World War. Gerald Malarkey was killed by shrapnel in France in 1918. Robert Malarkey was gassed and died slowly back home in 1926. Don grew up hearing their names at family dinners, seeing their photos on the mantle. He knew what war cost, but he also knew what happened when good men did nothing. So in the summer of 1942, 20-year-old Donald Malarkey boarded a train heading east. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't know what he'd become. He only knew that somewhere in Europe there was a war to win, and he was going to be part of it. But what Malarkey didn't know is that the training ahead would break 5 out of every 6 men who tried it, and the ones who survived would be sent on the most dangerous mission of the entire war. In August 1942, Donald Malarkey arrived at Camp Toccoa, Georgia, a brand new training facility carved out of red clay and pine forest at the foot of Mount Currahee. He was assigned to Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division. The name sounded impressive. The reality was hell. Easy Company was commanded by Captain Herbert Sobel, a by-the-book officer who believed that only extreme discipline and punishment could forge soldiers capable of surviving behind enemy lines. Sobel ran the men until they vomited. He inspected their rifles with a magnifying glass. He failed them for microscopic flaws and made them run Mount Currahee, a 1,000-foot climb, over and over, carrying full packs in the Georgia heat. The mountain's Cherokee name meant stands alone. By the end of training, so did the men who made it through. Malarkey didn't quit. He couldn't. Quitting meant going back to the regular infantry, where you didn't choose your fight. In the Airborne, you volunteered. You earned $50 extra per month, jump pay. More importantly, you earned respect. Paratroopers were elite. They were the tip of the spear, and Malarkey wanted to be shark.
After months of hell at Toccoa, the survivors were sent to Fort Benning for parachute training. This was where most men washed out. Jumping from a plane at 1,200 feet with a 30-pound chute strapped to your back isn't natural. Your brain screams at you to stop. Your legs lock up at the door. The instructors called it freezing. If you froze, you were out. Malarkey didn't freeze. He made his 5 qualifying jumps and earned his silver parachute wings, the badge of the Airborne. Only 1 in 6 soldiers who started training at Toccoa made it this far. Malarkey was one of them. But the hardest test was still ahead. In December 1942, Easy Company was ordered to march from Camp Toccoa to Atlanta, 118 miles in 3 days. It was a competition against another regiment. Captain Sobel told them they had to beat the other unit's time. He didn't tell them it was nearly impossible.
They marched through rain, cold, and darkness. Malarkey carried his rifle, full pack, ammunition, and a 60-millimeter mortar base plate, over 60 pounds of gear. His boots tore his feet apart. His shoulders bled under the pack straps. By the 3rd day, men were collapsing on the side of the road. Some were vomiting blood. Others simply sat down and refused to move. Malarkey kept going, but near the end, his legs gave out. He dropped to his hands and knees and started crawling. He had come too far to quit now. If he had to crawl into Atlanta, he'd crawl. That's when his buddy Warren Skip Muck grabbed him by the arm. Skip was a farm kid from Pennsylvania, quiet, loyal, tougher than barbed wire. He looked at Malarkey and said, "No friend of mine crawls anywhere." He took Malarkey's gear, threw it on his own back, and pulled him to his feet. When they reached the finish line, Skip filled Malarkey's mess plate and made sure he ate. They sat together in silence, too exhausted to speak. That moment forged something deeper than training. It forged brotherhood. Malarkey and Skip Muck became inseparable. So did the rest of Easy Company. They trusted each other with their lives because they had already proven they wouldn't quit. Not on the mountain, not on the road, not ever. Malarkey was assigned as a mortarman in the 2nd section. His crewmates included Skip Muck, Alex Pencala, and Bill Guarnere, men who would become legends. In 1943, Easy Company shipped out to England to prepare for the invasion of Europe. They didn't know when, they didn't know where, but they knew it was coming. What nobody told Malarkey is that in less than a year, he'd jump into France in total darkness. His plane would be hit by anti-aircraft fire, and he'd land completely alone, miles from his objective, surrounded by Germans. If this story's hitting you, leave a comment with the country you're watching from, and subscribe for more real stories of war. June 5th, 1944. Evening. Somewhere in southern England. Donald Malarkey and the men of Easy Company sat in a sealed camp, faces painted with charcoal, gear checked and rechecked. They had been briefed on the mission. Drop into Normandy behind German lines, secure key roads and bridges, prevent enemy reinforcements from reaching the beaches. General Eisenhower himself had visited them earlier that day. He looked them in the eyes and said, "Good luck." Some of the men wondered if he knew how many of them wouldn't come back. At 11 p.m., Malarkey climbed into a C-47 transport plane with 17 other paratroopers. The plane was packed. Men sat shoulder to shoulder, loaded with over 100 pounds of equipment: main chute, reserve chute, rifle, ammunition, grenades, rations, gas mask, and trenching tool. Malarkey carried his 60-millimeter mortar base plate and rounds. If he landed hard, the weight could snap his legs. If his chute didn't open, it wouldn't matter. The plane lifted off just after midnight. Malarkey looked out the small window and saw hundreds of other C-47s forming up in the darkness, the largest airborne invasion in history. 18,000 American paratroopers, thousands more British, all heading into France, all jumping in the dark. As they crossed the English Channel, the men sat in tense silence. Some prayed, some slept, some stared at nothing. Then, as they reached the coast of France, the sky exploded. German anti-aircraft fire ripped into the formation. Tracers streaked past the windows. Flak shells burst around them, rocking the planes like toys.
Malarkey's C-47 was hit. The pilot jerked the plane left and right, trying to evade the fire. Inside, men were thrown against the walls. Some vomited. The red light above the door turned green. "Go, go, go!" Malarkey jumped into the blackness. The noise of the plane disappeared. For a few seconds, there was only wind and darkness. Then his chute opened with a violent jerk. He looked down. He couldn't see the ground. He couldn't see other chutes. He couldn't see anything. The planes had scattered. The drop was chaos. Men were landing miles from their objectives, some in flooded fields, some in German positions, some tangled in trees. Malarkey hit the ground hard in a hedgerow somewhere in Normandy. He cut himself free from his chute, checked his weapon, and listened. Gunfire, distant explosions, voices shouting in German. He was alone. For hours, Malarkey wooved through the darkness, using a metal cricket clicker to identify other American paratroopers. Click, click. If you heard click, click back, they were friendly. If you heard nothing, or bullets, they weren't. Slowly, he found other men from Easy Company. By the afternoon of June 6th, enough of them had assembled to move toward their objective.
That's when Lieutenant Dick Winters received the order that would change everything. 4 German 105mm artillery guns were firing from a position near Brecourt Manor, a French estate about a mile inland from Utah Beach. Those guns had a clear line of fire onto the beach. Every few minutes, they sent high-explosive shells into the American troops landing there, killing and wounding dozens. If those guns weren't silenced, the entire landing could fail. Winters was told to take them out. He had 12 men. The German position had over 50 soldiers, machine guns, and fortified trenches. A normal assault would require at least a full company, 120 men. Winters had 1/10 of that. Malarkey was one of the 12. Winters didn't waste time. He positioned 2 machine guns to lay down suppressing fire, then led 2 assault teams forward using a classic fire and maneuver tactic. One team shoots, the other moves. Malarkey set up his 60mm mortar and started dropping rounds onto the roof of the manor house. He fired 7 or 8 shells, keeping the Germans' heads down while the assault teams closed in. The fighting was brutal and fast. Winters and his men moved from trench to trench, throwing grenades, firing at point-blank range, and clearing each gun position one by one. Malarkey kept his mortar fire tight, walking the rounds along the German line. Decades later, when he visited Brecourt Manor as an old man, he saw the shrapnel scars still pitted into the stone walls. Within 2 hours, it was over. All 4 German guns were destroyed. 15 Germans were dead. 12 were captured. 1 American soldier from A Company was killed. Several others, including one of Malarkey's closest friends, were wounded. But the guns were silent. Hundreds of American lives were saved on Utah Beach that day because 12 paratroopers refused to back down. Winters captured something else too, a German map and a functioning radio room inside the manor. The map showed every artillery position on the Cottonton Peninsula. That intelligence was sent up the chain and used to plan the next week of attacks. The assault on Brecourt Manor is now taught at West Point as a textbook example of small unit tactics under fire. For his actions, Donald Malarkey was awarded the Bronze Star. But Normandy was just the beginning. Malarkey would fight for 23 more days in France, then almost 80 days in Holland. And what nobody knew yet is that in a frozen forest in Belgium, he would lose something he could never get back. By September 1944, the Allies had liberated Paris and were pushing east into Belgium and Holland. The war seemed to be ending. Some officers thought Germany would surrender by Christmas. They were wrong. British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery proposed a bold plan: drop 3 airborne divisions deep into Holland to capture a series of bridges spanning the Rhine River. If successful, Allied tanks could pour across those bridges, bypass the German defensive lines, and strike straight into the industrial heart of Germany. The plan was called Operation Market Garden. It was the largest airborne operation ever attempted, and it was a gamble.
Donald Malarkey jumped into Holland on September 17, 1944. By now, he was no longer a private. He'd been promoted to sergeant before the jump, a field promotion earned through courage, competence, and survival. He was also transferred from his beloved mortar squad to lead an infantry squad. It was a hard change. The mortar crew had been his family, but Easy Company had lost so many men in Normandy that they needed experienced leaders wherever they could find them. Malarkey stepped up. The jump into Holland was cleaner than Normandy. Daylight, clear weather, minimal anti-aircraft fire. Malarkey landed near the town of Eindhoven and linked up with Easy Company within hours. Their mission was to hold a narrow strip of land the soldiers called the Island, a stretch of road and farmland between the towns of Eindhoven and Arnhem. It didn't look like much, but it was the only route for British tanks trying to reach the final bridge at Arnhem. If the Germans cut that road, the entire operation would collapse. For nearly 80 days, Easy Company fought on the island. It wasn't the explosive chaos of D-Day. It was something worse, a grinding, exhausting battle of patrols, ambushes, and artillery duels in the cold and mud. The Germans hit them every day. Snipers, mortars, counterattacks. Malarkey led his squad through it all, moving through hedgerows and flooded ditches, trading fire with SS troops who refused to give an inch.
On October 5th, Malarkey and his squad used mortar fire to destroy 2 German SS companies that were trying to overrun an American position. The fight was close and brutal. When it was over, dozens of Germans lay dead in the fields. Malarkey's men had held, but the cost kept climbing. Every day, someone didn't come back. Every week, a new face filled the empty spot. And the worst part? It didn't matter. Operation Market Garden failed. The British paratroopers at Arnhem were surrounded and destroyed. The bridge they were supposed to capture, the final bridge, the one that would end the war early, never fell into Allied hands. Thousands of paratroopers were killed or captured. The war would not end by Christmas. It would go on and on. By the time Easy Company was pulled off the island in late November, Malarkey had spent almost 80 straight days in combat. No hot meals, no showers, no rest. Just cold, wet, and constant danger. He'd watched friends die for bridges that didn't matter and roads that led nowhere. Some men broke mentally. Others numbed themselves with alcohol or shut down emotionally. Malarkey kept leading. He didn't have a choice. In late November, Easy Company was finally sent to the rear for rest and refitting. They were billeted in a quiet French town. For the first time in months, the men slept in beds, ate hot food, and didn't hear gunfire. Malarkey wrote letters home. He tried to explain what he'd seen, but the words didn't come. How do you tell someone what 80 days of combat feels like? How do you explain the smell of a hedgerow full of corpses? How do you describe the faces of the men who didn't make it? He didn't. He just wrote, "I'm fine. Hope to be home soon." But the war had other plans. On December 16, 1944, Adolf Hitler launched his last desperate gamble, a massive surprise offensive through the Ardennes forest in Belgium. German panzer divisions smashed through American lines, encircling the town of Bastogne and threatening to split the Allied front in half. It was the largest battle the U.S. Army would fight in the entire war, and Easy Company was about to be thrown straight into the middle of it. What Malarkey didn't know is that in the frozen woods around Bastogne, he would lose the one person he couldn't afford to lose, and it would break something inside him that would never fully heal. December 18th, 1944. Easy Company was loaded onto trucks in the middle of the night with almost no warning. No winter gear, no proper ammunition resupply, no intelligence briefing. Just orders. Get to Bastogne now. The men didn't know what was happening. They only knew it was bad. The Germans had punched a 50-mile hole in the American lines. Panzer divisions were racing west, trying to capture the fuel depots and supply routes that kept the Allied armies moving. If they succeeded, the entire offensive into Germany would collapse.
Bastogne was a critical road junction. 7 highways met there. Whoever controlled Bastogne controlled the battle. The 101st Airborne was being sent to hold it, at any cost. When Easy Company arrived, the situation was chaos. American units were streaming back in retreat, some of them shattered and leaderless. German artillery was already pounding the town. Within 24 hours, Bastogne was completely surrounded. No reinforcements, no resupply, no way out. The temperature dropped below zero. Snow began to fall, and Easy Company dug in. Malarkey and his men scraped foxholes out of the frozen ground in a dense pine forest just outside Bastogne. The ground was so hard it took hours to dig even a shallow hole. Some men gave up and just piled logs and dirt around themselves. It didn't matter. The cold got through everything. Boots froze solid. Canteens turned to ice. Men developed trench foot. Their toes turned black and had to be amputated. Others got frostbite so bad their fingers cracked and bled when they tried to hold a rifle. And every day, the Germans attacked. Artillery fire came in waves, shredding the trees and sending jagged splinters of wood and metal flying through the air like shrapnel. The forest became a killing zone. You couldn't see the shells coming. You just heard the whistle, dove into your hole, and prayed. If the shell hit close, the concussion could rupture your lungs even if you weren't hit by shrapnel. If it hit your foxhole directly, there was nothing left to bury. Malarkey had been in combat for 5 months straight. He'd seen men die in Normandy, Holland, and France, but Bastogne was different. There was no front line, no safe rear area, just a shrinking circle of frozen, exhausted American soldiers holding off an entire German army. Supplies ran out, ammunition ran low, medical supplies were gone. Wounded men lay in the snow because there was nowhere to take them. But Easy Company held.
On December 23rd, the weather finally cleared enough for a Catholic chaplain to hold Mass in the woods. 2 of Malarkey's closest friends, Skip Muck and Edward Babe Heffron, attended together. Afterward, Skip turned to Babe and said something that would haunt Heffron for the rest of his life. "At least if we die in a state of grace." 17 days later, on January 10th, 1945, the Germans launched one of their heaviest bombardments of the entire siege. Shells rained down on the forest where Easy Company was dug in. The blasts were so close together, it sounded like one continuous explosion. Men pressed themselves into the bottom of their foxholes, covering their heads, waiting for it to stop. Then one shell fell directly into the foxhole shared by Skip Muck and Alex Pencala. Both men were killed instantly. Donald Malarkey was less than 50 yards away. When the barrage lifted, he crawled out of his hole and ran toward where Skip and Alex had been. There was nothing left, just a crater. The 2 men who had trained with him at Toccoa, marched with him to Atlanta, jumped with him into Normandy and Holland, gone in a single second. Skip Muck was the man who had pulled Malarkey to his feet when he collapsed on the march to Atlanta, the man who filled his plate when he was too exhausted to eat, the man who said, "No friend of mine crawls anywhere." And now he was gone. Years later, Malarkey would say, "I lost something in Bastogne that I never got back." He wasn't talking about equipment, he was talking about a part of his soul. Easy Company held Bastogne for 39 days. The town never fell. On December 26th, General George Patton's Third Army broke through the German lines and relieved the siege. By then, thousands of Americans were dead or wounded. The 101st Airborne had been nearly destroyed as a fighting force, but they had stopped the German offensive. The war would go on. Malarkey survived Bastogne without a scratch, but the mental wounds went deeper than any bullet could reach. The war wasn't over. There were still months of fighting ahead in Germany, but for Donald Malarkey, the worst part was already behind him. What came next would test whether he could hold on to his sanity long enough to make it home. If you've made it this far, let me know in the comments. Did you know Donald Malarkey's story? Subscribe and share this video. After Bastogne, Easy Company was supposed to rest. They didn't. In late January 1945, they were sent to Hagenau, a shattered town on the French-German border near the Rhine River. The mission was patrol duty, cross the river at night, capture German prisoners for intelligence, and get back alive. It was supposed to be quieter than Bastogne. It wasn't. German patrols hit them every night. Snipers watched every move. Artillery fire came in without warning. Men died in the cold and dark for a few yards of frozen riverbank. Malarkey led his squad through it all, moving like a ghost through ruins and ice. By now, he'd been in combat for over 150 consecutive days. Most men broke long before that. Malarkey just kept going. Because of the massive casualties Easy Company had suffered, over half the original men were dead, wounded, or missing. Malarkey was temporarily assigned to lead an entire platoon. That was an officer's job, but there weren't enough officers left, so a sergeant had to do it. Malarkey didn't complain. He just did the job. In March 1945, Easy Company crossed into Germany. The fighting became surreal. Some German units surrendered without a shot. Others fought like fanatics, defending every village and bridge to the last man. Malarkey and his men moved through towns that had been bombed into rubble. They saw civilians starving in basements. They saw children with nowhere to go. And they saw the camps. Concentration camps, labor camps, death camps. The smell hit you first, miles before you saw the barbed wire. Then the bodies, stacked like firewood. Thousands of them. Skeletons with skin stretched over bone. Some were still alive, barely. They looked at the Americans with eyes that had seen hell. Malarkey had seen a lot of death by then, but nothing prepared him for that. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. Germany surrendered. Just days before, Easy Company had captured Berchtesgaden, Adolf Hitler's mountain retreat in the Bavarian Alps, the famous Eagle's Nest. By the time they got there, Hitler was already dead, and the Nazi leadership had fled. But the symbolism mattered. The men who had jumped into Normandy in the dark, who had held Bastogne in the frozen hell, who had fought across an entire continent, they were the ones who took Hitler's house. Malarkey stood in the Eagle's Nest and looked out over the mountains. It should have felt like victory. It should have felt like justice. But mostly it just felt empty. All the friends who should have been standing there with him were gone. Skip Muck, Alex Pencala, dozens of others whose names he would never forget. In November 1945, Easy Company was officially deactivated. The men were sent home. Donald Malarkey had served 172 consecutive days on the front lines, more than any other man in Easy Company. He had jumped into Normandy, fought in Holland, survived Bastogne, and helped end the Nazi regime. He had earned the Bronze Star with Oak Leaf Cluster, the Purple Heart, the Good Conduct Medal, and multiple European campaign ribbons. But the medals didn't mean much, not compared to what he'd lost. When Malarkey boarded the ship back to the United States, he thought the war was over. He thought he'd left it behind in Europe, buried in the frozen forests and shattered cities. He thought he could come home and be normal again. He was wrong. The war followed him home. It lived in his dreams. It lived in the faces of the friends who didn't come back. It lived in the sound of a car backfiring that made him hit the ground. It lived in the guilt that whispered, "Why did you survive when they didn't?" Donald Malarkey had fought the Germans for 172 days and won, but the battle against his own memories had just begun, and that war would last the rest of his life. Donald Malarkey came home to Oregon in the winter of 1945. He was 24 years old. He'd seen more death than most men see in a lifetime, and now he was supposed to go back to normal. In 1946, he re-enrolled at the University of Oregon to finish his business degree. He sat in classrooms with 18-year-olds who talked about football games and weekend parties. They had no idea what war was. They had no idea what it cost. Malarkey didn't talk about it. He just studied, kept his head down, and tried to blend in. But the nightmares wouldn't stop. He'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, hearing the whistle of incoming artillery. He'd see Skip Muck's face. He'd see the foxhole that wasn't there anymore. He'd feel the cold of Bastogne in his bones, even in the middle of summer.
Doctors didn't have a name for it back then. They called it shell shock or battle fatigue. Today, we call it PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. But in 1946, you were just expected to deal with it. Be a man. Move on. Malarkey tried, and then he met Irene Moore. She was different. She didn't ask a lot of questions. She didn't push. She understood something that most civilians didn't, that soldiers carried things you couldn't see. Years later, Malarkey would say that Irene understood the morale of soldiers. She gave him space when he needed it. She gave him stability when he couldn't find it himself. She loved him not in spite of the war, but through it. On June 19, 1948, the same day his graduating class walked across the stage at the University of Oregon, Donald Malarkey married Irene Moore. It was a small ceremony, simple, quiet, the kind of day that didn't make headlines but changed everything. They built a life together. 4 children, Michael, Marianne, Sharon, and Martha. A house in Oregon, a job selling cars, then insurance, then real estate. In 1954, Malarkey was elected as a county commissioner for Clatsop County, a local government position helping manage roads, budgets, and community services. He was respected. He was stable. From the outside, it looked like he'd made it. But inside, the war never left. He had nightmares for decades. He struggled with depression. He drank more than he should have. And at one point, in the darkest moments, he considered ending it all. The guilt of surviving when so many of his friends didn't, it crushed him. Why me? He'd ask himself. Why did I get to come home and they didn't? There were no good answers. Just silence. For decades, almost nobody talked about what soldiers like Malarkey were going through. PTSD wasn't widely recognized or treated. Veterans were expected to get over it. So Malarkey buried it. He worked, he raised his kids, he smiled at family dinners, and he suffered quietly. Then, in 2001, everything changed. HBO released a 10-part miniseries called Band of Brothers, produced by Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg. It told the story of Easy Company, from training at Toccoa through the end of the war. It was based on historian Stephen Ambrose's book of the same name, and Donald Malarkey was one of the central figures. He was portrayed by actor Scott Grimes. Millions of people around the world watched his story. They saw the jump into Normandy. They saw Brecourt Manor. They saw Bastogne. They saw Skip Muck die. For the first time, people understood what Malarkey and men like him had lived through. The series won 7 Emmy Awards and became one of the most critically acclaimed war dramas ever made. But for Malarkey, it was something deeper. It was cathartic. For 56 years, he'd carried those memories alone. Now, the world knew. People thanked him. They honored him. They remembered his friends. It didn't erase the pain, but it gave it meaning. In 2008, Malarkey published his memoir, Easy Company Soldier, The Legendary Battles of a Sergeant from World War II's Band of Brothers. He wrote about Toccoa, Normandy, Bastogne, and the cost of survival. He wrote about Skip Muck and the men who never came home. And he wrote about the battle to keep living when part of you died in a foxhole in Belgium. After the book, Malarkey became a voice for veterans. He traveled with the USO to military bases and hospitals in the United States and Iraq, visiting wounded soldiers and talking to them about what comes after the war. He knew what they were facing. He'd lived it. And he wanted them to know they weren't alone. In 2009, the French government awarded him the Knight of the Legion of Honor, one of France's highest honors, for his role in liberating their country. He stood in a ceremony in Paris, an old man now, surrounded by dignitaries and cameras, but he wasn't thinking about the medal. He was thinking about the friends who should have been standing there with him. By 2012, Malarkey retired from public life. His health was declining. He spent his final years at home in Oregon, surrounded by his family. Irene was still by his side. They'd been married for 69 years. On September 30th, 2017, Donald George Malarkey died peacefully at his home in Salem, Oregon.
He was 96 years old. His children were with him, so was Irene. He didn't die alone in a frozen forest. He died at home, surrounded by the life he'd built after the war. When the news broke, tributes poured in from around the world. Scott Grimes, the actor who portrayed him, tweeted, "Rest in peace, kind man. Thank you for letting me pretend to be such a beautiful father and hero. Love you, Don." Donald Malarkey had survived 172 days of combat. He'd survived the nightmares, he'd survived the guilt, and in the end, he'd survived the war, not by forgetting it, but by learning to live with it.
Donald Malarkey wasn't a superhero. He didn't have special powers. He wasn't born for war. He was a kid from a logging town in Oregon who wanted to go to college, maybe teach school, maybe work in the timber industry like his father. But history had other plans. When his country called, he answered. When the training broke other men, he kept going. When he jumped into the darkness over Normandy, he didn't know if he'd survive the next 10 seconds, but he jumped anyway. When he was ordered to assault 4 German cannons with only 11 other men, he didn't ask if it was possible. He just did it. And when the war finally ended and he came home broken, haunted, and guilt-ridden, he didn't give up. He built a life. He raised a family. He survived. That's the real heroism. Not the medals, not the movie. The quiet, grinding fight to keep living when part of you died in a frozen forest in Belgium. Malarkey spent more consecutive days in combat than any other man in Easy Company. 172 days on the front lines. He earned the Bronze Star with Oak Leaf Cluster, the Purple Heart, and the respect of every man who fought beside him. But his greatest battle wasn't against the Germans, it was against his own memories, and that war lasted 60 years. His story matters because it reminds us that heroism doesn't end when the guns go silent. Thousands of veterans from every war, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, come home carrying invisible wounds. For decades, those wounds were ignored, dismissed, or hidden. Men like Malarkey suffered in silence because they didn't have the words to explain what they were feeling, and society didn't want to hear it.
But Malarkey's willingness to speak openly about his struggles, especially after Band of Brothers brought his story to the world, helped change that. He showed that you can be a war hero and still struggle with PTSD. You can be brave and still be broken. And you can survive the war and still spend the rest of your life fighting to heal. When he died in 2017, the world didn't just lose a World War II veteran, it lost a man who embodied the best of what his generation gave: courage under fire, loyalty to brothers in arms, and the quiet strength to keep going when everything inside you wants to quit. Scott Grimes, the actor who portrayed him in Band of Brothers, said it best. "Rest in peace, kind man. Thank you for letting me pretend to be such a beautiful father and hero. Love you, Don." That word, kind, says everything. After everything Malarkey had seen and done, after all the violence and loss, he remained kind. That's rare. That's real heroism. His family still lives in Oregon. His story is still taught at West Point. His memoir is still read by soldiers trying to understand what war does to the human soul. And every year, thousands of people visit the battlefields of Normandy, Bastogne, and Brecourt Manor, walking the ground where men like Donald Malarkey fought and bled so the world could be free. From volunteer firefighter in Oregon to hero of DDay, from 172 days in the hell of Europe to 69 years of marriage and family, from the frozen foxholes of Bastogne to the quiet dignity of old age. Donald Malarkey lived 2 wars, one with a rifle and one with himself, and he won both.